Today I'm going to be showing you how I made a tunnel on my layout. So welcome to my railway, which is called Edge Hay and Strines. My name is Carol Flavin and I am a railway modeller. My name is Carol Flavin. Now today I'm sitting in the middle of my layout, Edge Hay and Strines, because I'm going to show you how I made a tunnel. Now the tunnel, this one here, wasn't there. It wasn't in our original plans either, because the kids and I designed these mountains, which actually are bigger than they look from this angle, because I've focused on the tunnel mouth really. And they've been sitting there and they've sort of taunted me, because although they've been there and I made them from insulating foam block and I'd cut them to shape and I'd sort of put a bit of paint on them and so on, but they really did need the scenics doing on them. So recently I decided to start working on them. So I started at the end or the side, built up this area over here, which is some rather nice towering cliffs. This area, which is a sort of walkway up through a wooded walkway, and I started to put bushes and so on it. But there was this really annoying spot here, which was a bit of cliff that didn't look quite right and it looked totally unfinished. And I had a go at it and I still couldn't make it look decent, and I had this blinding flash I could make another tunnel. So I did, and the tunnel, although relatively short, still has something that curves into it and curves out again. So it actually adds interest to the layout. So this is how I made this tunnel. I hope you find it useful, I hope you find it interesting, and I'll speak to you again at the end. Okay. This is just a couple of shots to show you what it looked like before I started to make the tunnel and what it looked like after. This is the cliff face that I was going to build the tunnel against, and I've put in place the two tunnel portals, or the two tunnel entrances. These are some that I had already, but they are the model scene Pico ones. I like these because they're plastic moulded. You can paint them to make them look realistic, and you can also cut and shape them if you need to. Now, when you look at them in place here, you can see that at the far end, I needed to build a wall up on the side. And at this end, because they stuck out, I actually had to cut them off and make them look robust. So this is the far side, and I used an old tunnel portal, a double one as it happens, that I cut and fit and put into place so that I could paint it and make it look the same as the rest of it. The tunnel end facing us needed to have the sides cut off and some robust pieces put to hold it in place. And I used parts of the tunnel portal, the double one, that I used on the other one as well. And I cut those and stuck them into place. Because this tunnel was straight, I was able to use a carpet roll inner, one of the cardboard rolls that are inside a carpet, which I managed to get from a local carpet fitter. I measured up fairly carefully where I needed to put it, and I cut it and then painted it black, because the inside of a tunnel needs to look black. It's at a slight angle, and I used filler to place a layer at the bottom and a layer on the cliff face wall that allowed me to put it into place. Now this stuff, when it's dry, is rock solid, so I neatened it all up, tidied it up, and as you can see, by the way, I covered my track because I didn't want anything to drop on it. Once the tube was solidly in place, and I also used the filler to put the tunnel ends in place and to hold them as well, I then put some toilet paper and Mod Podge on the sides, and I sliced some fairly thin pieces of foam and put them on the top. This was just to give a sort of craggy look, and I stuck them down with Mod Podge onto the top of the tunnel and used some pins to hold them in place and left those until they were dry as well. Once the foam and the toilet paper on the side of the tunnel were dry, I then covered all of it with a layer of toilet paper and some Mod Podge on top, and then painted the whole thing a middish grey colour. These are the colours that I used to paint the cliff with. Once the grey paint was dry, I took a piece of sponge and some buff titanium and dabbed some of the lightish colour all over the whole of the surface. This will look like an area of cliff, so I used this speeded up piece of film to show you how I painted it with a mixture of a sponge, which I dabbed on it, a paintbrush, which I drew lines in, just to get the same look that I've got everywhere else. I'm a visual person, so once the cliff was painted, I put green paint to show where I wanted to add foliage to the countryside. I used a number of Javis products to create the hillside. That includes their hedge foliages in a couple of colours, something called the rough terrain mat, which I really like because it gives a surface that looks good, and also some static grass. Once it was dry, I put some grass on the top of it. Used the rough terrain mat to make my grass. This is what the upper surface of it looks like. It looks like a sort of mixed grass, and on the back there's a shiny surface, which is the adhesive when it gets wet. I made a small piece of cliff that I wanted to put in a specific place on the layout, and I cut out a piece of the grass, the rough terrain mat. I'd already painted some green on the top because overall I found that it works better if it's green underneath it, but you don't have to. You put it in place, having wet the surface you're putting it on, and then you wet the surface of the grass itself, and you push it into place. That sort of gets rid of any straight lines, and if you've manipulate it a bit with your thumbs and fingers, that helps as well. It looks very realistic. This piece was to go on a different part of my layout as it happens, but this is exactly the same technique that I used above the tunnel and on the cliff face above it, and I was very happy with it. I set to, again in this speeded up video, to create a realistic look with bushes, clumps of rushes, trees, and all sorts of other pieces that make it look as if it's a real cliff that's been there for a long time. This little box contains some examples of the clumps and the bushes that I used when I was making the surface. Below the tunnel, I put a wall that matched the sloping wall, the slight incline that rises up to the tunnels on the track, and I used some wallpaper that I've got, which is textured, which I then painted two different greys and stuck down, and then I also weathered it by putting some greenery on it. This is what the tunnel looked like when I'd finished it. This is the side of the cliffs and all the scenics that I put on it, and this is a short clip of what the whole thing looks like now that it's finished. And by the way, if anything looks unfinished on this, that's because it is. Because I am still working on this whole layout, and particularly the mountains, and some of this needs doing yet. This is just a last little shot of a train coming through town. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. Hope you've got something from it. One thing I would like to say is that sometimes you've just got to give things a go. Admittedly, I did have the two tunnel portal ends, but everything else really was just out of my cupboards, out of my store, out of my bits and bobs. And I thoroughly enjoyed making this because it just filled a gap, solved a problem that I felt that I had. I hope you realise that you could do something very similar yourself if you wanted to. Anyway, if you enjoyed this, please like it, share it, and if you would like to, go to my YouTube channel, which is Model Railway Scenics with Carol Flavin. Okay, Nice to speak to you. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.